several reasons. One, because it highlights the importance of the growth of restorative justice and restorative practices, but secondly, it's special because we're doing this event together.
Community Restorative Justice Ireland, along with Northern Ireland Alternatives, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of those organisations. Very much those organisations have been involved throughout the pre- and post-conflict periods of Northern Ireland, working in restorative practices, working with communities, very often as a stepping stone for communities in the process of peace building and normalisation. And really today is a celebration of that journey and of that process.
And little did I think that 12 years later I would be standing.
Northern Ireland Alternatives is a community-based restorative justice programme, and I suppose we're known best for working at the grassroots, particularly within loyalist communities, and intervening in situations where young people are under threat from paramilitaries. And what we do is try and take them through a process of looking at how their actions have hurt their victims, their community, themselves and their family, and they try and make things as right as possible. So the focus is on helping them change so as they don't reoffend, so that communities are safer and we've no more victims within communities.
Community Restorative Justice Ireland deal with a wide range of issues, everything from the most serious in terms of paramilitary style threats and attacks right the way through to low-level community problems around from car parking to antisocial behaviour. And essentially the process is about bringing together victims and offenders and getting a successful resolution which works in the interests of both parties and also in the interest of the community.
There were more important things that the organisations felt that they needed to be doing?
Well, I mean, we were painfully Good Friday Agreement. It's 1998. There's a lot of euphoria, but I guess also a bit of uncertainty. Is this agreement going to last? Is it going to work? Obviously, we're trying to move those who are involved in political violence to ensure they moved away from political violence, but secondly as well, to try to see that punishment beatings that had been part of the fabric of this society for decades began to change.
As an organisation, Community Restorative Justice Ireland, it's very much about community-centred and community-based restorative justice. It's about giving crime and victimisation and processes to deal with that back to the victims and back to the community.
I suppose some of the obstacles we initially faced was the challenge around would paramilitary step back from carrying out punishment attacks or paramilitary style attacks, and that's always a challenge. And I think very quickly we were able to say, listen, this doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, why do you keep doing it? The other challenge for us was with the system, and the system beginning to trust a very grassroots community group that was trying to work at doing peace building and community safety on the ground.
Well, when I think back 20 years to when the whole concept of community restorative justice was first coming to the fore in Northern Ireland, there was a positive feel about the place. We were in the wake of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, but I have to say around restorative justice there was a bit of cynicism as well. People would have raised an eyebrow or rolled their eyes because by some people it was seen as a soft option. It was seen as a sort of a liberal view of punishment, of justice, of sentencing. And of course there was a job to do in convincing people of the legitimacy and the credibility of a restorative approach. And I have to say that healthy cynicism or scepticism was within the police service as well, and many of us needed convinced. But actually the really positive thing is people didn't give up, they kept going.
I mean, as I was saying in remarks today, I remember meeting in sort of dark, miserable, danky, dirty rooms almost in 1998 and kind of watching the evolution of the whole thing 20 years later.
I knew very little about them until I came into the role of Deputy Chief Inspector in the Criminal Justice Inspection. And at that stage, we were still working through the Criminal Justice Review, Lord Clyde's work in terms of trying to move restorative justice practice forward in Northern Ireland, and indeed these schemes as exemplars of good practice. And for us then it was about the attitudes of the department and the agencies and wider politics in Northern Ireland who were suspicious of the schemes and questioned whether they would have a future in a reformed criminal justice system. I suppose for us, once you got near the schemes at all, you realised that they were authentic and they worked with very high levels of integrity. And of course they had, their biggest critic was the community that they served, not addressing themselves to probably political masters, but actually the community themselves.
Very much crime and offending is owned by the formal criminal justice system at the minute, so it's about giving people a voice back and taking back ownership and having a say in how they can heal the harms as a result of crime in the community.
Once the protocol was developed by the Criminal Justice Board, and it set a very high bar for the organisations here, we then devised an inspection process that would be robust and that would be capable of criticism and withstanding the sort of political criticism that there was around at that time. And I believe we achieved that. We did pre-accreditation visits, and we worked with the organisations in terms of what it was that they needed to do to bring themselves into a state where they could be subjected to that kind of external scrutiny that the inspection process would give them. And to be fair, each and every one of them have managed to do that in terms of their policy and practice and indeed the governance arrangements that they have established to ensure that they're operating to the highest ethical standards.
We have the accreditation process in place, which is very important, and what we have seen is victims being increasingly satisfied with the outcomes. We see people, mainly young people, but not solely young people, not getting into a cycle of repeat offending. So this works for everybody, and it's actually a much more efficient way of delivering justice in a meaningful way.
There's a great interest in restorative justice being done here. It's actually seen as an international model because it's groundbreaking, it's innovative, it's direct to the community. It's sometimes, it's certainly doing critical work and sometimes doing dangerous work, but most of all it's successful. And so that's why the international community is looking at the work being done here to see how we could replicate it in other places. I think this is to a certain extent a unique situation, which makes it a learning situation as far as restorative justice practices. But the reason why people are looking at it, because there is post-conflict in many different places, and people want to see what works and maybe learn from that. In the restorative justice world, you learn from each other, and you see where things are working and how things can change. Red Hook, my court was an international model for restorative justice, and many people have come to Red Hook and taken what we do and applied it in their communities. It's going to be the same here.
Certainly the last 20 years, as we're celebrating today, has been very much a process and a journey. Certainly Community Restorative Justice Ireland and Northern Ireland Alternatives came about as an alternative, human rights compliant alternatives to dealing with paramilitary punishment attacks in the mid-1990s. And over the years they have been steadily building support in the communities, and I think importantly working communities where policing was not accepted or the police wasn't trusted for political reasons. And certainly a core value of CRJI has been that communities need and must work with the police. So it's also been a journey of bringing communities on board and getting them to work and build trust with the police organisations, and helping the police, importantly, to understand communities, because it's much more than a collection of individuals. Communities have their own subtleties, their own structures, and it's about finding a balance which works in the best interest of the community.
Well, sometimes that can be community confidence issues around policing. There can be certain barriers there that really we rely on other agencies to help us to try to break those down, to build up the confidence in policing and to encourage then local residents to come and report things to police. So having this type of agency can help us with that interaction. And also sometimes we understand that there can be some frustrations around perceived outcomes in terms of criminal justice, and that's not always necessarily what resolves issues and what problem solves. And sometimes it's better to try and get parties together through discussion and really try and resolve issues that way, that the criminal justice outcome isn't always what we're striving for.
Well, first of all, I mean, you're humanising, both persons are humanising one another. I mean, and normally in a conflict, people don't meet face to face. I mean, people end up faceless, and as one kind of theologian once said, sort of, dehumanisation precedes genocide. It's much more difficult to injure a person when you've built a human relationship with them. And, I mean, we do need the legal system, no one's denying that, but we need a multidisciplinary approach to building peace. So yes, we need judges, we need lawyers, but we need theologians, we need academics, we need philosophers, we need a wide range of people to make this work.
It's absolutely critical that courts, police, and community come together. What I love about NIA and CRJ is that they're bridging the gap between the community and the police. If you're looking to build trust and justice, community, police, and the courts have to respect each other, hold each other accountable, but most of all, listen to each other. That's when you're going to have trust and justice, and that's when justice will have true meaning.
Working relationship with the police is vital from this type of organisation. We work very closely with alternatives, and that really gives us a good sense of community issues and what's happening on the ground, and it's a fantastic link for us. Not everything can be solved through policing and through criminal justice, and this is a vital agency then for us to work closely with to try and address the local issues and problems in the area.
We're on the cusp of something even better and greater with restorative practice. So in North and West Belfast, we're currently embarking on a pilot where the PSNI can make direct referrals to the restorative justice agencies. And that's a really healthy thing, because actually for the first 20 years it's been a little bit of a one-way street. We've been getting referrals from the restorative justice agencies. That has to be a two-way approach. It has to be one that looks at problem solving, it makes communities safer, and it actually means that young people especially are not being criminalised, but they are forced to face up to the consequences of their actions, take responsibility for that, and face their victims at times. And actually that leads to better outcomes and more satisfaction for victims as well.
I suppose the message I'd like to send out today, particularly to government, is look at what's happening in this room today. A grassroots nationalist and loyalist organisation are coming together. We're doing business and we're doing it well. So I think communities can't understand why government can't do that. And the other thing with austerity measures, I would say communities are very fearful. A lot of what underpins the vulnerability within communities is poverty, and poverty will only get worse. And the challenge to our government is don't just focus on the middle classes, don't just focus on the business leaders, don't just focus on the upper classes. Remember the most vulnerable in our communities, and a sign of how democratic a community is, or a society is how it treats its most vulnerable. Don't forget that.
We've seen 20 years of a journey. I think my hope for the next 20 years, if you like, will be for community restorative justice and Northern Ireland Alternatives to grow and to thrive. Certainly a big part of that will be having sufficient funding in place, being able to grow and becoming more mainstreamed over the course of the next number of years. I think some of the issues of going forward is some, I would say, reluctance perhaps in some quarters of the criminal justice system to fully accept the role of restorative practices. But the fact of the matter is restorative justice on both sides has really helped to engage communities, engage in preventative work, and some of that, while it can't formally perhaps be measured, it's a very significant part of the policing landscape. And I think, if we were to lose organisations like CRJ Alternatives, I think a significant chunk of community vibrancy, community cohesion would be lost, and then we're left with essentially policing a community of individuals, because CRJI are essentially the heart of the community when it comes to a whole range of community safety and policing issues, and without them as a key cornerstone, as a stepping stone, I think the quality of community life would be much poorer. So it's something I think we absolutely fight to have to hold on to.
Justice really should be done locally. It's the local community, the local police, the local courts that need to work together to produce that trust and confidence in justice. And so, yes, outside systems, that's important, but if justice and restorative justice is done locally, you're going to be successful.
At the end of the day, the thing has worked. I mean, you only need to look at the statistics. The amount of people are engaging with these processes is absolutely excellent. So for people that are cynical, read the latest reports. People that have engaged, lives have been changed, lives have been redirected. That's the key concept. So people can fling mud from the sidelines. I would say to those people, roll up your sleeves and come and join some of the work that's happening.
I hope that this work can continue, and I hope that develops further. I think there are further capacities around the non-court disposals and further things that groups like this can really become involved in the longer term, and I hope that happens.
I believe that the value that they add is immeasurable, and actually, and trying to quantify it in financial terms does a great disservice to the volunteering and what these individuals do in their own time, at their own expense, to try and make their own community safer is immeasurable for me.
This is just a great moment when you have NIA and CRJ coming together. Yes, they've done 20 years of restorative justice, but now they're celebrating this together. They are really showing the way forward as a model example for their community and for the world in general, that going forward is the way to go. And we're going to be watching their success for a long period of time.